we're on. I always laugh when they have to read my bio because, as you can imagine, Tampa was my city a couple weeks ago. Hillary Clinton, ACLU, Human Rights Campaign. So I want to actually begin by telling you a story that is a personal story, and I actually rarely do this. But I'm 30, and 15 years ago, I spoke a very basic truth about myself to my mother, my father, and my sister. Perhaps you've already guessed, but I told them very simply that I'm gay. And if anybody in this room has ever had to have that conversation with a family member, you don't have to wave your hands now. It doesn't always go over quite as smoothly as you might think it would. I recommend doing it around Thanksgiving, maybe when some extended family is around. So, you know, probably the most prominent influence on my life and my hero is my mother. And so I was certainly felt like I was on eggshells watching her go through her process of understanding, you know, what does this really mean for who she thought I was and where I was going in life. And, you know, something else about my mother that has always been a source of strength for her and for me is her fundamental belief that knowledge, logic, and even data will set you free. You know, we've all heard the truth shall set you free. My mother believes in the principles of logic and data, and she became an economist. She is the only woman in her family to attend college as a first-generation American. This was her path forward. This is something that no one can take from you. And so when I was growing up, everything was a formula. I didn't get an A in a class. She came back and said, well, everything is a formula. You just need to add more homework time to the left-hand side of that equation. So really a normal childhood, as you can imagine. So, you know, within, I think, 24 or 48 hours of me telling them that I was gay, I saw, of course, in her and my father's bedroom stacks of books, you know, when someone you know is gay, this and that. So I sort of, you know, I hung low, and one day I came to her bedroom, and I mean, literally, she looked just tears, crestfallen. I just thought, oh gosh, what's the next conversation going to be? And I got closer, and next to her was a stack of pages from the Washington Post. Now, this was in the 90s, so it was pre-Craigslist, pre-Match.com. There was a thing called classifieds. My mother, who could not even utter the word lesbian, her economist mind had been studying the frequency rates of women seeking women ads versus men seeking women and men seeking men. And she just said, Deena, the numbers are not on your side. It is always the shortest column. It is always the shortest column. Look at this. And she had weeks of data already assembled. So, you know, this was, I didn't really know how to react, but okay, you know, and then I probably shouldn't share this. It is a TED forum, so I guess, actually, you know, it's fine because, you know, TED is free and therapy isn't. So I'll just say that she said, you know, and this is, again, my mother's very prim and proper. She said, they're all buxom women and they're not looking for LTRs. So LTR is a long-term relationship for those. So, you know, this was obviously difficult news for all of us. But the truth that she was speaking that I find particularly relevant today, and you heard from my bio, is that whenever something is new to us, we fundamentally crave, as part of this new story, an understanding of how many. What are we talking about? What is the quantity here? And now, you know, before my current position, I worked a lot on gender issues in politics. And what do we women always say? You know, we hold up 50% of the world, we hold up 50% of the sky. There's an immediate visceral understanding of what that 50% means. The speaker before me had a slide that had the 99%. You know, we define ourselves and we define social movements by numbers. Now, what do you do, though, when there's no count of who you are? So, actually, before I took my current job, this was 5 years ago when I joined the Human Rights Campaign, a national organization working on LGBT equality. I swear my real sense of hesitance was that I didn't know how to make a case for equality without knowing how many of us there are. Do you know, I'm just curious, does anybody know what the estimates were the last time the US Census was out? Of how many lesbian, gay, bisexual? You know why you don't know that? Because no one's ever asked. There's not a single all-encompassing federal survey of this population. and yet we're in a position to advocate for our rights. The best we can do are, I'm sure you've heard 1 in 10, perhaps you saw the movie about Kinsey. We certainly know celebrities, but no one's been able to get their arms around how many people are like me, are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. And so I want to tell you the narrative of just how this movement, the particular portion of the movement I work on, was able to define itself without that data point that is so critical to virtually every other social movement. 10 years ago in the United States, 2002, states like Florida had bans on same-sex couples adopting children. There were no federal hate crimes protections. This was, after Matthew Shepard and countless other LGBT people were murdered or faced violence for who they are. Don't ask, don't tell was the law of the land. A case known as Lawrence v. Texas had not been decided, and so certain homosexual acts were actually rendered criminal in this country. So it was within this rather grim legal environment that advocates that predate me, I just happen to have the privilege of being on this stage, launched an incredibly innovative strategy. While part of this movement would be lobbying on Capitol Hill for our rights, would be coming out and telling our stories, a quiet and deliberate movement to engage with corporate America began. Because in corporate America, you don't always have to make a business case that what you're proposing is going to affect hundreds of thousands of people. In fact, you get to make the case like, what do you gain by allowing discrimination in your workplace? Do you want the next brilliant idea that could come from someone who also happens to be LGBT to be lost to harassment or the discrimination or the bias of a hiring manager? And so quietly and methodically, this movement was able to engage with the private sector. And I should state why this is also so important. Even today, the state of Florida, where we are, joins 28 other states in which it's perfectly legal to deny me or fire me or otherwise make a job determination simply based on the fact that you know I'm gay. And that's because we don't have federal workplace protections for this community. And so you'll hear us say this, us meaning those in the movement, that you can be denied a job, fired simply for being who you are in 29 states. And so what's the hope? I'm guessing some of you, just statistically, may in fact be LGBT or have someone in your family, someone that you care about. What has cut across this map of states in which this is allowable? It's actually been the very rapid gains made within the private sector. And so the conversations that took place were first based, I think, on the talent case. You would never want to lose this talent. And then the second profile that emerged was that of the LGBT consumer. And so again, quietly and methodically, the brilliant minds in marketing were able to determine with subsamples of this population just how much are they estimated to have in terms of their buying power. And the most recent estimate from Wittett Communications, a premier firm, is upwards of $790 billion. So this is a consumer market that's loyal to companies that do right by them. They're savvy, they investigate, and they do it largely actually through the types of reports that we put out at HRC. So one thing that I think is pretty astounding in this work is, as I said, you don't always have to make the case that thousands or millions of people will be impacted by this. But what you can do is quantify what inequality means. And what do I mean by that? On average in the United States, roughly a fifth of your total compensation from your job, from your employer, comes in the form of benefits. And so if you've got lesbian Deena and straight Deena working in the same office, and I don't have access to domestic partner benefits and equal compensation, that means that someone who's exactly the same as me but happens to be straight is walking out with 5/5 or a whole paycheck, and I'm walking out with 4/5. And that flies in the face of the fundamental sense of fairness we all have around equal pay for equal work. So something else that I think is very important to know about this community is that with the law of the land being the Defense of Marriage Act, Are you all familiar with what that is? I see some nods. So this is the law that prevents the federal government from recognizing same-sex marriages and same-sex partnerships. And I say both because I'm from the District of Columbia, and if I were to marry a woman there, where it is legal, or marry a woman in the state of Massachusetts, that has absolutely no bearing on hundreds of federal benefits that, again, someone who's exactly the same as me and just happens to marry a man. Most notably, every April during tax season, same-sex couples often owe the government about $1,200 or $1,300 more than their straight peers. And the reason for that is, as critical as healthcare benefits are, when a woman like myself enrolls a domestic partner in her benefits plan, the fair market value of those benefits is added to my W-2 as taxable income. And so again, same two workers, one ends up with a tax liability paying the government about $1,200 more than someone who's straight. So it's this ability to quantify impact over sheer size of a population that has moved corporate America forward. You know, in the last 18 months, we've seen companies from Google to Time Warner to financial service and law firms actually add to the total compensation of those who have to pay this tax so that both are walking out with the same net income, meaning that it's called truing up or grossing up of income. But the jargon's not quite as important as the principle. That corporate America is given a floor, if you will, below which they can't go in terms of federal mandates, but they're not given a ceiling. You know, they can go well ahead of what lagging lawmakers are asking them to do. I have a sibling, I have friends, I have family who care about me and feel a personal investment in these issues. And what we are seeing across this youngest generation of people is that even those who are not LGBT care so much about these issues that they do make their decisions as far as who they want to work for and where they want to spend money based on these principles and values that a corporation can demonstrate. And so probably on a weekly basis, a hiring manager will tell me, you know, I was interviewing somebody and they're not even gay, and they're asking us why we have this score on your annual scorecard of our corporate LGBT practices and not this one. So the extent to which a company is forward-looking certainly translates to their ability to recruit and retain top talent. Any other questions, Nathan?
Doing us a big favor because Deena's doing us a big favor because I hear some tummies rumbling.
Yeah.
And I think if you'd like to, what would say in government, you can pass your time on to the next speaker.
Yes.
Is that right? So we've got about 3.5 minutes that we'll pass on if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Deena Fidas. Thank you. That was fantastic.
Thanks.
That was good. Thank you.